welcome. I will start with the presentation from the UK team to give you an overview of the overall project, which was funded by the AHSCE and with the title African Hub for Sustainable Creative Economies. So the project is made up by a very international team, and you will obviously meet colleagues here in the UK, but also across Africa from the University of Kenya, University of Lagos, and Witwatersrand University in South Africa. So the point of this meeting is really to discuss and to share with you the findings overall from the project, and we're very much looking forward to obviously getting your question and learning also about getting feedback from you on the overall findings. And the way this webinar is structured is that I and Brian will give you an overview on the project and what's happened in the 15 months through which the project ran. And then each of the team in the different partners location will give you a more insightful reflection on their own activities on the ground and the findings related to that specific hub and country. So to introduce the project, as I said, the other teams will introduce themselves soon towards when they present with their presentation. But to get started, I'll introduce you to the UK team. This is made up by myself, Roberta Comunian. I'm based at King's College in London in the Department of Culture, Media and Creative Industries, and also my colleague, Lauren England, who is also a lecturer in the same department, who can't unfortunately be here today. And the other person that you will hear from in a few minutes is Dr. Brian Arax, which is based at the University of Southampton. So to give you this presentation really wants to give you an overview on the project, and we structured the presentation in a way that reflects our final report, which discusses collaborative activities, unpacking impact and sharing learning towards the project. And we'll come to some conclusions to also reflect on what are the next steps and the legacy of our own project. So obviously, I'm assuming most of the audiences in this event are familiar with the term creative economies, but we foregrounded a little bit the conversation on this theme within the project with previous research work that we have undertaken across Africa with another AHSCE grant. And in that project, we came to the conclusion that in the context of Africa, it's really more interesting to talk about the idea of creative economies rather than creative economy, because there is not one single creative economy, but a multiplicity of creative economy, which are having always overlapping and diverging agendas, and also accounts for a range of business model and objective and organization involved in these, which extend beyond the proper economy and goes into much more social economy sort of sphere. And within this research project, we really wanted to investigate more these creative economies across Africa, but we also were interested in exploring ideas around creative entrepreneurship and creative work in Africa, and also in the connection between creative economies and sustainable development as being something that is obviously underexplored, but very relevant to the development of African countries. We had some amazing partners. So as I said, in the UK, there were a team at the University of Southampton and King's College in London, but we had three amazing partner universities in Africa, University of Lagos, Witwatersrand, and University of Nairobi in Kenya. And the project main objectives were to support and strengthen the connections between these universities in Africa and their own creative entrepreneurs and local creative economies, to see how some of the activities of this university could contribute to sustainable entrepreneurship across the cities where they're based, but even more broadly, the countries in which they were operating. And finally, and also in a sort of way more important, and we will talk about this in the last few slides, in terms of the legacy, we really wanted to raise the profiles of research on creative economies and creative entrepreneurship in Africa and the role that the university can play in it. I will pass now the ball to Brian, who will cover a little bit more about what we actually did during the project. Brian, I think you're muted.
Sorry, next slide, please, Roberta. Thank you. So the main, before I get into a little bit more detail, the main point here is that, as Roberta mentioned, we had three different locations. And in the different locations with the different hubs, as you see from the graphic, we are focusing on three different sort of creative industries or sectors. So performing arts in Nigeria, mainly fashion in Kenya, and film and digital media in South Africa. And this is really useful because we not only got to drill down and learn more about these specific industries and sectors, but also look at some comparative elements across locations and industries. Next slide. Thank you. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is this thing that we had for the project, which was Creative Imagination Workshop. So how did we bring people together? And as you see here, between May and June 2022, we had a total of 12 online creative imagination workshops across all of the different hubs. And each workshop was hosted by the local hub PI and the UK team and included a guest speaker and lots of other participants. Just in case you're interested, we had between 15 and 62 participants for each of the events with a total of 493. We'll call them participations because it's sometimes difficult if people are coming and going and dropping out. And we recorded all these events and shared them. So after the first launch event, we held a series of what we called themed workshops, and you can see some of them on the screen here in each hub and looking at different important themes and issues. So for example, making theater viable in Nigeria, looking at the role of technology in Kenya's fashion industry, and importantly, supporting women in South Africa's film sector. Now, after we did these, the initial launch and got to know people, we were encouraging people to start networking and interacting and collaborating. We then launched our collaborative voucher scheme, which called for proposals for projects that were funded between 500 and 1,000 British pounds, but we calculated that in local currency to kickstart collaborations between creative or academic researchers, and the funding could be used for all kinds of things, as you see here. It might be a pilot study, it might be to develop some new skills, to rent equipment or space, to take some kind of project forward, and importantly, all of the proposals were required to be connected to one or more of the local theme as well as the SDGs. Next slide, please. Thank you, Roberta. Thank you. So now we're going to look at some of the impacts from these. Thank you. So as you can see here, the collaborative voucher scheme was able to fund 25 projects, and we were quite happy with that. You can see the breakdown by location and hub. And this ran from between September 2023 and March 2023. Sorry, September 2022. And a little bit more details you can see, which is important to say. We worked with 63 individuals, and there was a real mix of who these individuals were. Some were academics, some were creative practitioners or entrepreneurs or involved with community organizations. Some were early career researchers or practitioners, which was really important. And the bottom graphic, which I know is a little bit hard to see, but you can check it out in the report, is we mapped these different projects to the different UN Sustainable Development Goals, which was really important for us. So for example, gender equality, or number 8, which is decent work and economic growth. Next one, please. Thank you. You can go one more. Thank you. So just thinking about some of the impacts from the different projects. So as you can see, the collaborative voucher scheme was able to fund a bunch of these different projects. And yeah, so the first theme that we were looking at here was really in the report, thinking about the different challenges and rewards of these different types of collaborations. And I can't do it justice in the next few minutes. I think this is a really innovative and helpful thing for the project and also the report, something that I personally haven't seen in too many reports, where we basically had all or many of the people, everyone on the project, academics, practitioners, people involved in the voucher scheme, people running the different things, actually having space to reflect on how they felt it went, some challenges, some rewards, and it's really interesting to see that, and I encourage you to take a look. But a few things to point out. So of course we had some challenges, as we're doing now. One of our biggest challenges was running this event during the time of the pandemic, and having to take what would be maybe a face-to-face type of approach and put this online and use different platforms, different technologies. And in some ways, this provided some really good benefits. For example, we were able to reach a much wider audience, people outside of the large cities, for example, Nairobi or Lagos, people in more rural parts of the country. We also were able to lower entry barriers. We, lower travel costs or zero travel costs. That type of thing. Also time, instead of having to go and travel and take a whole day, you could just hop on and be part of it for an hour or two. But of course, we did run into typical issues around connectivity and power issues, which created a bit of a struggle. Many project participants also reflected on the value of the opportunity as part of the voucher scheme to, again, sort of break down some of the barriers and create collaborative links between different groups that they wouldn't necessarily get a chance to talk to and work with. For example, as you see here, the third one, collaborating with communities and young people. So a lot of the projects actually spearheaded the opportunity to work with, for example, like community theater, or to do educational purposes, or to work, for example, with young women who are interested in getting into the film sector. And again, there's a lot more detail in the report. I won't have time for it today, but so these are the three main ones. Next one, please. So just a little bit wrapping up for me. Again, a lot more detail and some really interesting quotes, and looking at learning not only within the sectors, but across sectors, and really pointing out the specificity and the importance of local conditions and context. So what's going on in South Africa? What's going on in the film sector? How is this different than maybe an international context, or what some of the literature is telling us? What are the tax schemes in different countries? What are the different supports? How are they working? How might they be improved? So there's lots of detail about specific recommendations, but in the report we decided to pull this together in 4 ways. The first one is not surprising to anyone related to the knowledgeable about the creative economy and creative entrepreneurship, and the idea of finding funding and business support. And on the surface, that seems really obvious. But again, when we think about different types of mentorship, tax schemes, different types of funding for different types of activities like renting equipment and things like that, that can be a challenge for workers in these industries. We were able to talk about that. Number 2, enhancing skills and knowledge. Again, there were specific industry skills, like how can I use this camera or this platform, but there were a number of things that were raised. For example, internationalization strategies. How do I take my work beyond my local context? That type of thing. I mentioned tax clinics and things like that, understanding local tax schemes so they can be compliant but also be strategic, and this type of thing. Number 3, we talked a lot about the role of unions and industry organizations. On one hand, to help support and protect workers in specific industries, just using film as an example, and how this might be different, but also thinking about more universal benefits and supports that would be positive for all creative workers. So I think this is an important point. And then finally, thinking about celebrating and supporting creativity. There were lots of local schemes and initiatives. I can't go into all of them, but things like Fashion Fridays in Kenya, or rural film screenings in South Africa to, again, get outside, to be more inclusive beyond large cities or creative clusters, and that type of thing. So again, it's all in the report. I just try to highlight a few things for you. Thank you. I think, Roberta, I'll ask you to kindly come back and wrap up our talk with some conclusions, please.
Yes, in terms of the conclusion of the project, obviously what we wanted to develop was something that wasn't going to finish just with the project. So we used a lot of online opportunities and social media, as well as a lively YouTube channel, to gather some of this knowledge and make it as much as possible available to anybody who has an internet access, obviously. So we really have continued throughout, and even with this webinar beyond the project, to really make sure sure whatever knowledge we have that is available on creative economies in Africa can be made more accessible, both from academic perspective, but also from the practitioner perspective. So if you add up into our YouTube channel, you'll find that we have continued to gather the knowledge and share it as much as possible. And that very much was the idea of keeping the hub alive by keeping on sharing this knowledge and growing it. And as I reflect back, obviously, on one of the aim of the project was to also have a legacy, not to let this just die as the funding came to a closure, but also to think about how can we create a memento, how can we remind universities in Africa, as well as obviously in the UK and even in Europe, that creative economies are really important. The research on creative economies is vital for supporting the creative economies, but also to highlight how important it is and what kind of not only economic revenues it generates, but also important social and cultural development goals. And so we started talking with ARUA, the African Universities Research Alliance, and also with the Guild, a university network of European university, and they were just starting to think about how to build a platform for collaboration. And we put forward a proposal to be one of those platforms. This platform was called the Core, so Clusters of Research Excellence, and they really build bridges across universities in Africa and in Europe through those networks. And our core on creative economies, culture, innovation, sustainability was accepted. It is one of 20 cores that are supported by this organization. And very much this means that our work can keep on continue within this framework and to the engagement of all of the universities that are partner and more universities that have joined us across Africa. We can actually raise the profile of creative economies, make sure that we can disseminate knowledge, and make sure we can also empower more researchers, so new PhD researchers, new early careers researchers, to take on this subject and to explore further this area of research. So I just really close with just saying that the hub is very much alive through this new African Europe Creative Economies Cluster of Research Excellence. And if you follow our social media or keep up with our YouTube channel, there will be more content that will be shared through the network. I now close my presentation and pass the ball to our Lagos team, which is made by Professor Duro Oni and Cornelius Onyekeba. I will share.
Thank you very much, Professor Roberta Communion and all the other members from King's College and from Nairobi and South Africa. Our presentation is supporting sustainable development in and through theater in Nigeria. There has been some exponential growth of arts and culture in Nigeria. Go on to the next slide. Next one. From Wole Soyinka's Nobel Prize for Literature in 1986 to Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, to the recent winning of Grammys and appearances as main acts at global events like the World Cup, Nigerian arts and culture has indeed become one of the most sought after in today's world. In 2017, Afrobeat songs were raking in 2 billion annual streams on Spotify. The figure, however, grew up at an exponential rate in 2022 to 13.5 billion streams, which is about 550% increase. Next. The Nigerian film industry, also popularly known as Nollywood, has also grown in leaps and bounds. The effect of COVID-19 opened up the Nollywood economy, as many subscription video on demand platforms such as Netflix, Showmax, and Amazon Prime Video are now streaming, in addition to a thriving cinema and cable TV business. The same great strides are also being recorded in so many of the things. So now we have plenty of live theater performances in Lagos. The live theater industry has also come alive in other cities across Nigeria, with the introduction of a vibrant and consistent live theater, with Terra Culture of Bolanle Austin Peters taking the lead in Lagos. Also, the recent construction of new theater facilities across many state capitals in Nigeria. Furthermore, the remodeling of the National Theatre in Igomu, Lagos for better service. Next slide, please. Live theatre in Lagos. Work focused on the Crown Troupe of Africa, Kennesaw Concept, and Roots of David. All of them are graduates of our Department of Creative Arts, University of Lagos, and have provided new apprenticeship models for growing the theatre space in urban and semi-urban spaces. Next. The first major thing that we had to do from the Lagos end was employing a creative partnership coordinator. That went through the process, and we had to get King's College involved in this, so in order to ensure that this was done in a transparent manner. And finally, we had a CPC coordinator. Thank you. Next slide. Event launching. The public event of the Lagos Hub effectively commenced on the 10th of May 2022 with the launching of the event with a key address by Professor Sunday Ododo. The event featured 3 breakout rooms, and we had a lot of them. So at this stage now, I'd like to hand you over to Dr. Cornelius Onyekaba, who will now take on the presentation, and then I will come back later to conclude the presentation. Thank you very much.
The Creative Imagination Week, which was for us a rich exchange of ideas between the industry players and members of the higher education institutions, took off. Next slide, please. And that was the beginning of the interactions. And of course, for that week, which ran from June 8th, 9th, and 10th, we had some of the finest selection of personalities to serve as the keynote speakers. Of course, Bolanle Austin Peters, that runs the TerraCulture Theater, one of the biggest commercial theater facilities in Nigeria. And then Israel Ebo, who happens to be the national president of theater arts practitioners in Nigeria. And then Shegu Adefila, who runs the Crown Troupe of Africa, which is one of the strongest individually run theater companies in Nigeria. So for that period, each day we had people attending from across Nigeria and our friends all over the world to listen to them as we took on the following titles. Please, the next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, for example, on the 8th, we looked at making theater viable in Nigeria, economic and business prospects by Bolanle Austin Peters. So we looked at the general issues that has to do with the creative economies of the theater in Nigeria. And on the 9th, we looked at sustainability of creative partnership in the performing arts by Mr. Israel Ebo. And on the 10th, theater contribution to social change and development, because the role of theater in social change is very big here in Nigeria. And Shegu Adefila was really a befitting person to speak about that on that day. Next slide, please. So, for the Lagos Hub, we carried out a total of 15 interviews with major stakeholders in Nigeria. It was really tough in terms of getting them, in terms of connection, the internet, the Zoom interviews, and all that. By the end, the breakdown is as simple as this. 5 of these stakeholders were organizations and institutions, while the other 10 were key individual stakeholders in the industry. You know, the stakeholders provided vital information on the state of the theater practice in Nigeria, their experiences and challenges, and collaborations with higher education. Next slide, please. So, for the voucher scheme, which has been discussed and talked about already, for the Lagos Hub, we had over 20 proposals. And at the end of the day, we were able to come down to picking 9 major participants for the voucher scheme through the screening process that had to do with us in Lagos and the King's College team working together and getting these final 9 groups that merited the voucher scheme. Next slide, please. So these are the awardees of the voucher schemes in terms of what the projects they executed. Art for life, because in Nigeria, we usually talk about art for art's sake and art for life's sake. So art for life, meaning art that actually helps to address social issues. Then, of course, we had a very interesting one that took place in Anambra State, awareness of the inheritance of the girl child in Igbo land. How they address a very critical issue that has a lot of what challenges in terms of cultural acceptance. The girl child inheritance in Igbo culture, the girl child is not supposed to inherit anything from the parents. But this group boldly faced that issue with their project, and it was well received. Then another one came from northern Nigeria, Fill the Blood Bank. This project involved the medical center of a university, and when they finished exhibiting the plays, people naturally volunteered to do what? Donate to the blood bank. So that's like a community theater, a socially active theater. Then we have Food for All, Zero Hunger, which also address the issue of hunger, how to raise money, how to raise food for people. Then, of course, Project T was more of a teaching hub where children and other young college leavers were brought together and trained on some aspects of the theater. I think that was done in collaboration with NANTAB, the National Association of Theater Art Practitioners in Nigeria. Then Theater for Development was a very unique one. Egbeda is a suburb in Lagos. It's a very backwater community, if I may use that term. So the children there were brought to the Bariga Theater where Shegwa Defila and the rest of them are, and the children were exposed to some challenges that they can address through the theater. Then the blind minstrel took place in Ibadan. Well, you can see that our groups were dispersed all over Nigeria. They were in different places. Then Voice It was an incubation program that took place between Edo State and Lagos. 2 experts working on selected youths at the same time. Then, of course, Young Nigerian Thespians was another very interesting one where they tried to train the younger ones on how to become future thespians, starting from a learning hub. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'm going to invite back Professor Duroni to take us on some key findings of the project. Thank you.
Thanks, Cornelius.
Well, sorry for this small break in transmission there, but I'd like to welcome you all back and thank Dr. Cornelius Onyekaba for the presentation. Some of the key findings: the project provided a major platform for interactions between higher educational institutions and the wider theater community. The project also helped in identifying the importance in the use of collaboration in driving the growth of creative economies in Nigeria. The Creative Voucher Scheme provided seed money required by some of the participants to test run some of their innovative ideas. Through some of the projects, young and talented school children were exposed to a possible career pathway in theater arts. Next slide, please. The project was also able to identify the various ways theater practitioners are addressing the SDG goals in their communities using theater as a vehicle. The fact that the entire project was executed through the use of internet access with minimal person-to-person contact also helped to reveal the limitless possibilities available to the theater using the internet as a vehicle. Next slide, please.
Sorry. Okay.
I think we've gone
2 steps down.
2 steps.
We move to the
Yes,
recommendation.
now on recommendations. Based on past experiences, we wish to recommend that groups that are working on incubation projects should continue to receive funding and monitoring to enable us keep track of the future career choices and outcomes for some of the young beneficiaries of the training. Next slide, that's recommendation 2. The Lagos State government should attach experienced theatre facility managers and other trained hands in the various ultramodern theatre facilities it has recently commissioned in the 4 local government areas of the state, and deliberately make such facilities a formal training hub for youths. Recommendation 3. Beyond training, there should exist a deliberate national policy to build more performance spaces with business models that places emphasis on encouraging products of the various training hubs to use such facilities at subsidized rates. Recommendation 4. Theatre troupes like the Crown Troupe of Africa that have directly and indirectly been responsible for the birthing of many other SME model theatre troupes across Lagos and our environs should be encouraged by both the private and public sectors to enable them to continue to grow the creative economy ecosystem for the sustenance of a training performing arts industry in Lagos. And the final recommendation, number 5, based on the success of this project, it has become pertinent for the University of Lagos and other HIEs in Lagos State to come with curriculum that provides the right synergy for collaboration between HIEs and other industry players, both in terms of the students gaining industry experience while in training and industry players coming for short-term programs to upgrade their academic credentials as well as put up productions. Next. And final, I thank you all for your attention on behalf of Dr. Cornelius Onyekaba, Dr. Folakemi Ogungbe, who is not here, and I. Thank you.
So I'll move on to introduce the team that worked on the project at the University of Nairobi, Ogake Muzomi and Waitira, and they can tell you more about what's happened there.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Roberta. As Roberta has mentioned, my name is Mrs. Ogake Muzomi, and I'm going to be presenting about fashion entrepreneurship, knowledge, networks, and higher education in Nairobi, Kenya, alongside Ms. Waithera Kibuchi, who's my colleague. We're both attached to University of Nairobi, Department of Art and Design. Next slide, please. So just a small background about the Kenyan fashion industry. At the moment, what we have is an industry which is made up of people practicing in different facets. We have designers, retailers, mass manufacturers, bloggers, stylists, among others. The Kenyan fashion industry, sorry, I have a bit of a flu. The Kenyan fashion industry contributes to 0.6% of the Kenyan GDP. It also makes up 6% of the manufacturing sector and contribute to 7% of export earnings. Most of the entrepreneurs in Kenya are operating in small companies which consist of 1 to 6 employees. That makes up about 94% of the companies in Kenya. And then we have large and medium-sized companies which make up another 1.4 and 1.5% of the Kenyan industry. Next slide, please. We also find that most of the innovation in Kenya is being championed by small enterprises and small companies, and about 90% of Kenya's labor force is made up of entrepreneurs. Unfortunately, despite this, almost 50% of the companies which are open, the SMEs and MSMEs, close within the first year of operation because of poor entrepreneurship culture within the country. But we have Vision 2030, which states that Kenya aims to be a newly industrialized middle-income country, which means that we need to push the agenda of entrepreneurship. Next slide, please. There are 4 main gaps that we've found within the Kenyan industry. Number 1 is that there's a low skill level within the fashion and textile industry. Number 2 is that there's limited access to modern technology. So most people are operating with quite outdated technology. And then we also find that there's a very informal entrepreneurship culture, what we call jua kali, which limits the capacity of people to scale their businesses. And then lastly, there's very low participation in international forums, which means that a lot of people are not really aware of what's happening on an international scale or the progress that the fashion and textile industry is making across the world. Next slide, please. So we have higher education institutions in Kenya which train young people or even older people in the fashion and textile industry. So courses are offered within universities, private mid-level colleges, and also TVETs. Most of the courses that are available focus on textile engineering, fashion design, and garment making. And the focus is to try and create not only employees, but also people who can go on into industry to create their own businesses. Next slide. So looking at the role of the fashion HEIs, number one, there's the role of knowledge creation, sharing, and collaboration. Universities are seen as custodians of knowledge and repositories of knowledge for students and trainers. So their mandate is to co-create knowledge with stakeholders. So stakeholders come together to share knowledge and drive innovation. So for example, we have what we call the Innovation Week in University of Nairobi, whereby innovations and startups, incubators, and mentorship come together to strengthen partnership and work with industry, government, and funders, etc. HEIs also have the role of convening and being network builders. We find that micro and small-sized sustainable fashion businesses rely on formal and informal networks to access a wide range of support and services. Therefore, universities can leverage on their far-reaching contacts within academia and industry to provide a platform for networking. Thirdly, we have universities being incubation and lab spaces, being seen as incubation and lab spaces. Because of their reputation, they have an ability to create links with industry, but also there's the fact that they already have existing spaces and relevant infrastructure for training, whereby practitioners come on board with practical knowledge and industry experience. We also have HEIs being sites for instilling professionalism by providing short specialized skills to upskill those within the creative economy, which calls for basically flexibility in the modes of training. So not only sticking to degree courses, but then expanding that into structures which can help entrepreneurs to upskill. Aside from that, we also have one of the biggest roles of HEIs being research. So they can be able to define the creative economy, because right now what we find in Kenya is that there's a lack of data on the size and scope of the industry, despite the fact that there's a large number of women and youth who are employed in the sector. There's also the role of sustainability. So HEIs can broaden their influence beyond just teaching people how they can develop, produce, and market garments. But on top of that, they can also teach people to think about their impact on the society and their impact on the environment. Lastly, we have the role of HEIs in training people for employability. So we also want to make sure that we instill an entrepreneurial spirit, but then also we train people through work placements, through attachments, to participate in the economy that they are going to be working in. I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Waithera Kibuchi, for the next slide.
Thank you, Ogake. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I will give a brief overview of the projects that were funded and discuss the key findings. So seeing as my colleagues discussed the methodology earlier, I will only mention that the creative imagination workshops in Nairobi were centered on 3 themes. The first was fashion, cultural heritage, and identity, which was followed by fashion, entrepreneurship, and innovation, and finally, fashion, technology, and digital media. A total of 8 projects were funded in Nairobi. I will now give a brief summary of the projects that were funded. On the left, we have Undameta, which revolved around the creation of an online marketplace for African-inspired surface pattern designs. A bridal kiondo on the right revolved around developing a contemporary version of the kiondo, which is a hand-woven basket traditionally gifted to women on their wedding day. Next slide, please. Next, we have Wastewear, whose collaborators used pre-consumer discarded textiles from local fashion brands to develop fashion products as a way of encouraging proper textile management. Work in Progress on the right used upcycled material sourced from Nairobi and its environs to produce reusable tote bags. Next, please. Luo Women Empower in Fashion on the left developed a Luo-inspired fashion collection and documented it for future reference through photography and videography. The Luo are a community residing in the western part of Kenya. On the right, we have Malisafi, who produced a documentary showcasing Kenyan fashion through the lens of sustainable practices. Next, please. Enhancing innovative entrepreneurship among the youth trained students on how to develop and market handmade fashion accessories created from discarded materials. Next, please. Last but not least, VASI developed a timeless gender-neutral capsule collection. These collaborations were a mix of entrepreneurs and academics across the industry. Now, the implementation of the voucher scheme project gives insights into opportunities for fashion higher education institutions to strengthen the industry. First, these institutions can act as network conveners. This project created a shared platform for educators, creative entrepreneurs, intermediaries, and policymakers to interact and exchange knowledge during the workshops and innovate during the voucher scheme. The University of Nairobi is a well-recognized institution, locally, regionally, and internationally. And this existing trust in the institution boosted the credibility of the project and predisposed partner institutions and industry stakeholders to participate. The voucher scheme took networking one step further by leveraging shared connections across industry and academia to enable the applicants or the participants to deliver their project successfully. Through these same networks, the interviews tapped into the knowledge of creative entrepreneurs and intermediaries for the Knowledge Hub. These findings indicate an opportunity for fashion higher education institutions to support fashion entrepreneurs by creating learning activities which engage with external actors, extending their formal and informal networks, and learning how to harness the social capital embedded within them. Next, please. Higher education institutions can also act as idea incubators. The voucher scheme demonstrates the impact of seed capital and support services to early stage ideas and ventures. First, being selected to participate in the voucher scheme validated the ideas behind the project and enabled the participants to access the resources they required to bring the ideas to life. Since the scheme did not limit the applications to fashion designers only, it encouraged the ideation of diverse projects, fostering other parts of the fashion ecosystem outside of garment and textile making, such as film, modeling, styling, and technology in fashion. It also gave participants the room to develop adjacent or complementary skills, such as product development for fashion stylists and entrepreneurial skills for academics. These outcomes suggest the potential for fashion higher education institutions and their partners to support entrepreneurship by offering incubation opportunities to entrepreneurs with different levels of skills and experience. Next slide, please. Higher education institutions also act as drivers of sustainable practices. Since the voucher scheme required applicants to link their projects to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the applicants reflected on the social and environmental impact of their proposed projects and considered approaches that went beyond merely creating products for sale. It also made them more aware of their influence and allowed them to articulate their positioning in the local and global context more clearly. This indicates an opportunity for fashion higher education institutions to equip emerging designers with a sustainability mindset by integrating this approach into their curriculum and learning activities. Next slide, please. Higher education institutions also act as drivers of employability. One of the voucher scheme projects, enhancing innovative entrepreneurship among the youth, focused on training students on how to develop and market handmade fashion accessories created from discarded materials. The design educators and students collaborated with practicing designers to ensure that the products they developed were market ready. Such linkages are crucial in providing real-world experience to students to help them understand what is required of them when working in the industry. Next slide, please. In conclusion, higher education institutions have a significant part to play in creating valuable networks, which can benefit academia and the creative economy at large. Their standing within the society makes them well placed to act as network conveners, idea incubators, and drivers of sustainable practices and employability. Knowledge creation and knowledge sharing are part of their core mandates, but this should not be limited to formal training. It should also extend to engagements with the fashion industry. This experience has proven that the synergy between higher education and the industry will lead to a stronger creative economy.
Thank you, Roberta, and thank you to everybody who's spoken before me. So in the interest of not repeating, we've already heard a lot about how the process happened, so I won't be speaking about that. We all followed the same process, and I think that's what made the the project really strong. And thanks to Roberta and the team from the UK for providing the context and the space to create these relationships between our higher education institutions and our sector, the South African film industry. So in the South African hub, I worked with Vuyo Madibi. Unfortunately, she can't be here, but she was our CPC. And we also worked with partners in the sector. Just going to find my slide here. So we worked with 3 partners, SASFED, which is South African Screen Federation, which is a federation of many other organizations, a really strong and powerful and important organization with many parts of that represent the full nature and all the value chain of the South African film industry. But we wanted to really bring that industry together with the innovation and digital technology sector. So we also partnered with Chimologong Digital Innovation Precinct, which is an ecosystem of its own with lots of entrepreneurship and training programs and training in animation and gaming. And we also partnered with the South African Cultural Observatory because we really wanted to make sure we're working with the most latest up-to-date research on the sector, which has been researched sort of to death for the last 30 years in our industry. And what was new about our work was not researching the industry so much as looking at where are the possible gaps. And we used the master plan for the culture and creative industries that was produced for the South African government to help identify some of the areas that were identified by the sector themselves as key gaps. One was the role of women in positions of authority, of ownership, also and climbing through the ladder of the film industry, the incredible digital divide that was still in place in our country, as well as the need to find pathways, career pathways for the youth that were not necessarily through the higher education institution, but how higher education institutions could facilitate and support the career trajectories of young emerging entrepreneurs coming through. So those became our key areas of projects that we then supported in the voucher scheme. So we had a really strong project on developing curriculum for film and animation and innovation for youth, which I will speak about, and also digital skills, bringing bridging the digital divide. But we also really wanted to look at how South African movies are not really known or seen by a large percentage of our population, that we are dominated primarily by Hollywood, but also by Nollywood, to be honest, and that South African products aren't getting the hearing that they need to. So we really wanted to look at alternative screening possibilities to showcase South African movies and also from the rest of Africa, and encourage and develop an appreciation for South African filmmaking. So we looked at film screenings both in peri-urban areas like in Soweto and in rural communities. And then we also wanted to really understand how we can support women in developing their own career paths and occupational status in the sector. So quite a lot of other projects that we did. So I'm going to only look at 3 set parts of the voucher scheme because there's so much going on. But as you've already been told, there's a lot of wonderful YouTubes to watch, independent videos with some of our participants, and also the report. So starting with the Kliptown Beehive digital film curriculum, this is developed with our partner department. We, the Cultural Policy and Management Department in the School of Arts, we also have a film and TV department. And Maka Jansen van Vieren is from that department. And he put in, with his colleagues, Neo Munyamane, a filmmaker, and Prince Massingham, a screenplay writer, a wonderful project to bridge the gap between traditional education and the dynamic needs of the film industry, to align educational offerings, to ensure that filmmakers that don't have qualification and have no access to university can actually receive the comprehensive kinds of training that they need to become successful as young filmmakers in the sector. And their method is very much a collaborative model using the theoretical knowledge that they have developed at university, but combining that with very practical skills in the sector. And they developed animation products. These are some of the animations that they developed. And I'm going to show a new movie that they've recently released. I'm going to jump around in the movie a little bit, so because it's too long, just in the interest of time. But the full video is available on the slide there, if you'd like to watch the whole video. So this is the animation that they developed using clay and all sorts of different products. So I wanted to stop on that. Animation is like magic. This is really looking at young girls in animation, and we're going to showcase another project that looked at girls in gaming, focusing on how this can really inspire the creativity of young people to realize they too can create animation products. The second area is a wonderful project called Girls in Gaming, and that was to empower young people in the Eastern Cape. As was said earlier on, because it was COVID, we had this incredible ability to now work with people very far away and really engage with people outside of the key urban centers like Durban, Cape Town, Joburg, and look at how extensive and expansive the sector actually is, and how many wonderful skills and expertise we have in other parts of the country, and to use those skills and expertise to actually do more. So this was a wonderful project with Olile Vundla, a technologist, Kangisile Zondi, a documentary filmmaker, and Ayad Lova, a software engineer, trying to looking at a project to mentor young girls in interactive digital media skills, animation and gaming. And this took place in 3 parts of the Eastern Cape. And I'm not sure this video, if you're going to hear audio, just let me know if you're not.
No.
No. Okay.
No, it's muted, but
Okay, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You've got a feeling of what's going on, and the focus of this young girl as she tries to develop the proportions of the face were just, for me, wonderful to watch in this video. I'm going to stop this. There we go. So we have wonderful video material, by the way, so please do look at some of that. Another project also looking at young girls and women, Chumamoy, was about educating and establishing a distribution network by Nokwanda Shabangu and Zanele Mtembu, a digital content editor and a broadcaster. So you can hear from the Creative Animation Weeks, we found many different people wanting to collaborate with one another, which was one of the key areas that we were asked to develop. And here they were saying to really get more girls and women into animation and into doing innovative filmmaking, we need to make sure they have access to Wi-Fi. So there was a project about identifying where are the hotspots, where are the Wi-Fi hotspots, and connecting the unconnected. And this again is a video there doesn't need to be audio, it's quite obvious. But what she's saying is she's looking at where did this research to identify all the Wi-Fi hotspots, which were typically in public institutions like libraries, schools, fire stations, clinics, and so on. And this is how they developed this using digital technologies to do that. Okay, and then we moved to the third area of our projects, which was alternative screenings, to really encourage an appreciation of South African movie making, but also for people to feel they too can enter into the sector and become filmmakers, storytellers, writers, producers, directors. This was the AHSCE documentary film screening, which is to revive the culture of the bioscope. The bioscope is an Afrikaans word in South Africa that means the movie house, and they did it at the Soweto Book Cafe, and ran many programs there to really talk about it, to discuss what was going on, to see what movies people people wanted to watch. And alongside that, we also had another project which was focused on rural art screenings, which was really to create alternative screening platforms in rural communities again in the Eastern Cape. This was with Sivuyiswe Giba, a documentary filmmaker and an entrepreneur, and Kanisile Zondi, a filmmaker and PR specialist. And they ran some wonderful projects around that, which we've also listed and spoken about in the project that Brian was talking about, the report on the project. I'm not going to speak about this, but I'm not going to show it, but I'm going to just speak about it and say this was an attempt to start with where people are at. What is a cultural expression you bring to this discussion, and how to engage with that heritage, that rich heritage, the wonderful talent that people have, to transform it into potential careers in the film and digital space. So just to end my section, I really wanted to, like Ogake, like Professor Oni, the role that the higher education institution can play is multifaceted, and there are many things that are really important. Needless to say, innovation, information, research dissemination, and that's a really important role, which is about not doing the research necessarily only, but translating that research to make it usable to the industry, so that industry feels they can access that research, but that they too were party to making that research, since they are the respondents of that research. And of course, the convening power that universities have to bring people together. If so many people commented after the animation, the creative animation sessions, that they don't talk to one another enough, and that they're all in their own little areas of work and working hard to find money, to create opportunities, to get market access. And that opportunity to talk to one another about common challenges was seen to be really important. So that convening power. Secondly, to really create the industry appropriate curriculum that is not only for the students at university, but take it outside the university and have outreach programs into the community like the Beehive project, and ensure that people who have no access and never will have access, partly because of poor education, funding, all sorts of reasons, but can access a similar kind of curriculum that is relevant to their accessing the careers in the sector. And also what's been fascinating to see is that the film and TV department now have a producing course in their curriculum that was not part of their general offering of their skills. And so that producing course is a recognition of the importance of entrepreneurship in creating those careers. And then obviously the higher education institutions really need to support alternative pathways to industry, different ways in. There are so many pieces of a value chain in the film and the animation and gaming industry. And a lot of what is needed often is simply the space to support those sectors. And what we found subsequent to the project ending is just offering of space for people to convene themselves in their own institutional member organizations to have meetings, because that is such in short supply. And then finally, the challenges are huge. Universities are not agile. They are not easy places to deal with financing and supporting artists, creatives, and paying people who are informally organized. So really paying attention to the informality of our sectors and needing to attach decent work criteria to how we work with our organizations and support them to ensure that decent work practices are happening, including ways of social dialoguing in their spaces. So really we found that the university was tough to work in getting that done, and we had to make workarounds all the time, such as ways to pay people using student methods that were available to student body, and making those available to our artists, to our respondents, our participants in the voucher scheme. So I really want to just acknowledge our voucher scheme participants, because it's their work that we are representing here, and to acknowledge the role of the convening power of King's College in making this project happen. There's so many moving parts to how you create a project like this. And I'm so glad that we can continue this in the core of, in the Arua Guild partnership. So thanks from me. Back to you, Roberta.
Thank you so much, Avrila, and I really thank you to all the African partners because for the amazing presentation, but also because you also made this work possible. Of course, we couldn't have done it remotely from the UK, and for obviously the universities that were involved, all that amazing network, all had amazing contact already with the creative sector that we could build on. So I'm gonna open up now to questions and answers. We got already some that we can get started on, but just to invite anybody that obviously has listened to the presentation to answer question, whether specific to one of the country or partners or whether general to about the projects and the different dynamics that have emerged. So I'm gonna, open up with a question from Seun, which was very specific to Nigeria in terms of the mobility of artists and the challenges of the mobility of artists there. And Professor Oni replied to him already in writing. But I think it's quite a nice big question that doesn't really concern just Nigeria and really is more about really this opportunity of many African creatives to work within that country, which sometimes are very big countries, but also to then think about their work internationally, potentially globally. And I know Brian and also done a lot of research in general on mobilities of creatives. So I think possibly we can all try to give a few inputs here in terms of the challenges and the barriers that are there and how maybe some creatives have overcome those barriers and really try to make the most of those mobility practice. So can I give Brian maybe the word for really a quick overview, I think, on the mobility issue, and then maybe ask each partner if they want to reflect to the mobility in relation to their own country/sector that they looked at within their own country. Brian, are you happy to just give a few words?
Yeah. Sure. The only issue is I can see some comments in the chat, but I don't see that specific question.
Oh, sorry. I thought the question and answer was visible. So Seuna asked about the Nigerian art scene, specifically said, how can creatives strategically navigate their ways around getting mobility so as to be able to showcase their work across border festivals, arts fair, and arts residencies?
Yeah, it's a great question, and as you say, Roberta, and others have mentioned, this is an issue where it's quite universal across different locations, different sectors, really around the world, where creatives want to create a sustainable income and business for themselves. So they need local customers, but increasingly they need international and global customers as well. I think this comes back to one of the points I made early on about what we're doing right now. We're all, many of us are located in different countries. We've been brought together using the platform of Zoom. And in the last couple of years, the use of social media and online platforms for interaction, but certainly marketing and importantly selling, is something that is just part of our daily lives in a way that it wasn't 5 or 10 years ago. So I think that the short answer to that is two things. One, the technology allows people, and we see lots of evidence of this from this project and specific examples in this project, which we can share and is certainly discussed in the report, for how people can engage local audiences and local markets and customer bases, but also promote and sell whatever their product is more broadly. Now, importantly, it's important to say the products are different. If we're talking about a film, which can be downloaded and streamed and viewed, outside of language, perhaps, this can be distributed widely. Visual artists, for example, talked a lot during COVID about this idea that if somebody in New York or another part of the world was interested in buying their products, it was fairly easy to ship it to them, a physical piece of art, a painting, some ceramic item. Performing arts, though, for example, another type of creative output is difficult beyond the local live performance. During COVID, people did record and do more digital versions, but obviously this is difficult recording and turning it into other things. So the nature of the product, is it a song, is it a film, is it a live performance, is it if it's something like that is a little bit difficult. So technology makes it possible. The only other thing I would quickly say, and again, this comes up in the report, is just because the technology allows this to be possible, a lot of the creatives in our interviews, for example, said that they didn't know how to go about this in a sort of business strategy. So how do you handle the marketing? How do you handle the shipping? How do you handle the actual engagement, setting up these, Instagram and social media and website profiles? One, it's not obvious how to do this, although lots of young people, especially, and people with certain training can do this. But two, a challenge that is raised is that even if they know how to do it, it takes up a lot of time to maintain these different channels. And then there's this sort of tension between producing creative outputs and trying to market and sell. And this is an ongoing discussion. So on one hand, it sounds really easy, just go online and connect with global audiences. But there's a lot of work that goes behind this. If there's time, we could talk about intermediaries and people that help to bridge these gaps and provide specialized skills and platforms and bring audiences and producers together. But I think it's a great question, and I'm sure everyone on the panel would have some example and thought on this. So I hope that's...
maybe if I can pass the ball to Professor Oni to maybe talk a little bit about mobility in Nigerian theater, maybe.
Well, yeah, from the performing arts perspective, I have been involved with a lot of international travel, essentially with the University of Lagos. Then it was called the Center for Cultural Studies. And then recently we became the Department of Creative Arts. Now, what we find is that, when performances want to go across borders, maybe there's an invitation to go to the United Kingdom or to the United States or Italy, and the troupe wants to travel. I mean, there are processes. You must try, to try and get visas. And there's always the fear that some of the young performers, when they leave the shores of the country and they end up in Europe or the United States, they just stay put. They don't want to come back. So my advice, which I put in the chat, is that the troupe that's involved in a performance tour must have built up some credibility for themselves. I mean, anytime you go to get a visa, even for an individual, they're able to, run on your profile. They want to know who you are. What have you done before? So if there's a troupe that just got formed last year, and then they say they have an invitation to go to the United States, and then you search for information on the troupe, there's no information available, there's no credibility, then it becomes difficult for the embassy people to even issue visas. So the thing is usually to build up. The three that we have worked with, Segun Adefila's Crown Troupe of Africa, Seun Awubajo, and Joshua Alabi, they have no difficulties. They've built up a reputation.
Two are outside currently.
In fact, two of them are currently outside of Nigeria, on performance tours. So whoever is wanting to do that, you must have a good team. I mean, even among individuals, you talk about travel records, that they want to know that you traveled before you have credibility, or when you go to, even among the academics, at some point, they say, oh, I'm going for a conference, in the United States, and then after the conference, you don't find the person. Of course, those are like junior academics and stuff like that, and then they decide that they want to make a career where they are. So that's my, I don't know if Dr. Yekaba would like to contribute to this.
Yeah, I don't know, Ogake, do you want to go next? I think obviously some of the projects that you were involved with included a lot of mobility, and I thought there was some interesting reflection in Kenya also in the mobility or between the rural and the urban, which is another issue of mobility and access of resources, of course.
I think the only thing I can add in terms of mobility right now is there are a lot of grants and funds which are centered around mobility. We have the British Council, East Africa Arts, we have Hever Fund, we have GTZ, among others. So there is a possibility of mobility, and but unfortunately, a lot of you find that a lot of this information is available to people within the urban areas, not so much within the rural areas. Yeah, that's pretty much what I'd like to add. I don't know if Waithera has anything else.
Just to mention on what Roberta said about rural and urban mobilities. You know, they say that it doesn't matter what you know, it matters who you know, and this is very true in the fashion industry. So a lot of times to gain access to a certain space has to do with knowing someone who can introduce you into that space or make that connection. And so I think a way to do this, especially when you're starting out, would be to leverage professional groups or communities where you can go in and as part of that group find someone who can introduce you or help you gain access to the area or the topic or the subject that you're interested in.
Thank you, Waithera. Avril, do you want to maybe reflect on that in relation to South Africa?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think this is such a big question, really, and it depends on the sector that you're involved in. Obviously, there's certain ones that there's a lot more mobility. So, for example, there was a fantastic project called Concept South Africa, which provided a digital fund to increase mobility between South Africa and other Southern African musicians. But that was a particular fund that was then had to migrate into a digital mobility fund during COVID. Our government also has a touring grant for mostly touring inside South Africa, as it's so expensive to tour anywhere else. But then, as Ogake says, there are all the unique partners, the Alliance Française, the French Institute, Goethe Institute, British Council, that really promote intercultural cooperation, which is typically via a performance or via an artistic production. So then it's important to think about in what way can your product be, whether it's a theatre product or a music product or a film product or whatever product it is, in what way can it have legs outside of your own country? And to really find partners that would want to showcase that work or even co-create that work with people from other countries, and then in that way it has more legs. But yes, it's really problematic. Visas are impossible. As much as, you know, the UNESCO 2005 convention talks about artist mobility, it's still something that we find people coming from the global south just have very little access, and artists in particular have even less access because they cannot show 3-month bank statements. They cannot show all the things that the visa embassies asking for, and most embassies are not adopting the letter of the law of the UNESCO convention to make it easier for artists and cultural professionals to travel, let alone academics in this space. So yeah, there's a lot more work that has to happen, and it's got to be almost like an activist, you know, program of artists in a country insisting to countries that are very much scrutinizing and not allowing access to showcasing work, to touring opportunities. Even when those opportunities come, doesn't mean you're going to go because somebody could stand in your way. So even if you had the funds, so it's not always the funds that is stopping. So yeah, it's not a pretty picture, basically.
Thank you, Avril. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of work to do to improve those conditions. I know, Avril, you answered already another question which was specific to film and media. There was a question which was connected to fashion, but I think it actually is a question that all of us can address in terms of the different hubs and the different application of this. So the question was in relation to fashion: how do innovators in Kenya fashion industry protect their novelty design in terms of copyright? So obviously I will ask Joanna and Waithera to address that, but I really feel like copyright was one of those issues that again was shared, and there were few projects within each of the hubs that try to deal with it or try to discuss it or address some of the challenges that each of the different creative sectors have to deal with in relation to copyright. So maybe Joanna, Waithera, if you want to get started, but then we can see if there is any other reflection from elsewhere.
Thank you, Roberta. What I can say about this is a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of fashion entrepreneurs are running their businesses informally, which means they don't even have that knowledge. We recently got a Kenya Fashion Council, and on the council, there's actually a lady who deals with IP law. Her name is Liz Lenjo, and Liz Lenjo has been trying to educate people about IP law and why it's important to copyright your work, etc. But there's still not a lot of information out there, so a lot of people are not protecting their work. But the other thing I'd also say is that with fashion, it's really tricky to copyright your work, because unless you're coming up with a completely new process, a lot of the products which are coming out are based on other products. There's a lot of like copying or a lot of borrowing information, so it becomes very tricky to copyright that work. The other thing I'd say is that there's also a copyright board of Kenya whose mandate it is to make sure that work is protected. And at the University of Nairobi specifically, we have a department which deals with that. So any innovations coming out of the university will be protected under that. And they've tried to make the process really easy, really quick. So there is work towards it. But what I'd really say is that information is power. And what Waithera had said about knowing someone who knows someone, lots of people don't know someone. So there's still a lot that can be done in terms of copyrighting fashion products. Waithera?
Thank you, Joanna. Avril, did you want to comment on that?
I just wanted to underscore the fact that that is a role that we have to play as higher education institutions to ensure that there's a dissemination of knowledge about how you protect your copyright and what are all the other intellectual property rights that you could be using to protect your work, such as, GIS symbols, trademarks, patents, and so on. Because the sector is so diverse, all our sectors are so diverse. There could be geographic indications that are more useful than a copyright protection. And I think part of the work that we've been doing in the Cultural Policy and Management Program is saying, well, we have so many different sectors represented in our class. It's not always easy to do a copyright discussion, because music copyright is completely different to film copyright, as it would be, I'm sure, Ogake, to fashion copyright, which is an area we don't even look at. So it seems to me that even in our educational institutions in Nigeria and Lagos, in Kenya and in South Africa, we need to be, if we can't do it ourselves, in bringing in this experts from the sector to run some master classes for our students, to start encouraging it into the curriculum, and to ensure that people who are teaching law degrees and so on are teaching about the creative sector, because they often miss that. Because the creative economy, as much as we talk about it as if we all know what we mean, the rest of the world out there doesn't always know what we mean. So in other words, we as departments in a university could be helping inform our colleagues in other parts of our university about how important it is to think about entrepreneurship in a business management course, in the culture and creative sector, or the legal issues around contracts, around copyright, around IP protection in law departments. So yeah, I think there's still so much more synergies that we need to create in the higher education institutions.
Yeah, I agree, Ravila, and obviously also it highlights that it is important to doing this interdisciplinary work within, creative economy. So again, to really think about what each subject can bring to the understanding and the improvement and the growth of the sector. Yeah, Professor Oni, do you have any comments in relation to the theatre sector in Lagos and IP?
Yeah. Well, in the theatre, usually the productions are published plays, and when they are published, there are copyright laws that guide those. But when the productions are to be staged by maybe school children, university students, they are usually exempted. But if it goes to professional theatre, then the copyright owner's approval must be obtained before the production is put up. And of course, if there is going to be some payment, that payment is also made. But that, for most university productions, they are seen as, educational. And so the playwrights are even sometimes just happy that the plays are being produced and staged by university students, so they become more popular, and then some publication may even arise from it, talking about the approach that was taken, in terms of the aesthetic development of the production and stuff like that. But we've had a couple of, there was one playwright once, and, he's even late, and the wife said, "Oh, I understand you staged my late husband's play." I said, "Yes, your late husband was our friend." And all that. I said, "No, you have to pay for staging the play." I would say, "Okay, how much do you want to get paid?" And of course, we were able to settle it amicably. But we were not even sure if the wife owned the copyright to the work or anything, but at least we were able to have an amicable settlement. But it's always good to do things properly, ensure that if it's a published play, that what are the copyright laws, what constitutes an infringement, and all of that. Thank you.
Thanks,
Then
Professor.
there are other dimensions. One house. Hello.
Yes.
Okay, so there are other dimensions, like if you want to adapt a novel, or you want to do a musical from the works of a living artist or even a late artist, there are copyright issues. Like I write musicals like about Fela, about some other artists. So there are times you need to get across to their families to get some kind of permission. And if you don't want those permissions, then you need to really understand how copyright rules work, so that in writing the play, it will be like a public performance, like a DJ playing the music, in that production. And so you escape any rules that may trap you in. But it's a very intricate path to navigate. So it's always better to know, especially what are the rules before you get into it. So like Prof have said, if you stage a successful production on campus, no matter how much you make from it as a student production, nobody gets to bother you. But then don't just in the euphoria of that success, take the same production outside the campus. The copyright owner will come after you. So that's as simple as that.
Thank you, Cornelius, for that input as well. We only have a few minutes left. I'm going to take the privilege of a chair just to answer or start answering the final question that we have from Jen, which is about, in a sort of way, I suppose, how our project could evolve and the willingness for us to reflect on sort of ways in which some of the theme we explored with this previous project could be taken more into a comparative international perspective. So Jen highlights that, for instance, we could look at things like fashion in Nigeria and South Africa, or performing arts in South Africa and Kenya. So much more think about how different countries and different practices in those countries tell us about those specific sectors. And just to say, obviously, the great news that this project can continue to the core and the ARUA, the Guild collaboration, means that hopefully we can get to address some of these. Obviously, we'll always be depending on funding, but I think one of the agenda, obviously, of the core will be very much to support and embed PhD students that do this kind of research and have possibility of mobility, so that they can actually, let's say, start a PhD in South Africa, but end up doing research in Nairobi, and then have that comparative opportunity to really explore a sector in different African countries in different ways. So I think, obviously, if anybody wants to add anything on that, please let me know. But I think it's very much the hope that this is the direction in which we travel and in which we empower more research to take place from this initial step that we took with the African Hub for Sustainable Creative Economies. If anybody wants to have a last word before we thank our audience. No? That's great. So just a final thank you, obviously, to all our lovely panel, and to So International joining us from very different corners of Africa and sharing this amazing work and all this research. Obviously, the final report is online, it's free to download, and much more details about all the project, all our learning is shared within that report. So feel free, obviously, to download it and read in more details. Use our social media, but also our email addresses if you want to get in touch, if you have specific questions, project, or other ways in which you would like to engage with the future core. And just a really big thank you for listening to us and asking questions.